Welcome, everyone. So this is the third meeting of the Salem City Seal Task Force. And yeah, we'll just dive right into the agenda. So we start with attendance, and I'll just do a roll call for our minute taker, Aditi. So Aditi, how do you say your last name? Just out of curiosity.
It's Alawat
Alawat, okay.
present.
Suzanne?
Present.
Poochie said she will be late. Uh, Michael Feener is he sent a notice ahead of time that he won't make today's meeting. Vijay,
Present.
Rachel,
Present.
Alphonse,
Present.
Rahina is present, and Carly is not here yet. Eileen is also not able to make it today. Okay, so we do have a quorum of 6 voting members, so we can go ahead and get started. All right, so the next item on the agenda is to approve previous meeting minutes. Are there any changes or any edits? Can we entertain a motion to approve?
Yes, I think.
Yeah, so somebody has to make the motion.
Yes.
Oh, I'll
Motion
make
to-
the motion.
Sorry,
And
maybe
can
I
I
wasn't
also
clear.
add, those were fabulously detailed minutes because I was unable to be here, but it was almost like I was reading those.
Good, yeah, and please make a habit of looking through them because it is important that we have an accurate summary of the meetings. And certainly if you have any edits, you can bring them up during this portion of the agenda. They will be published on the website, as you all are probably aware of.
Mhm.
Okay, so
I'll second that.
great. So who made the motion? Sorry.
I did.
Great. And then seconded by Vijay. And all those in favor, raise hand. Great. Approved unanimously. Okay, so next item, just moving right along, is to do a little refresher of our group values that we created last meeting. I'll try to get into the habit of covering these on a semi-frequent basis, just whenever we feel like we need to, touch on them again. So very quickly, just give me a second. Then view. You're seeing my screen, right? What?
Yes.
Yep.
The group values and norms? Great. So I'll read the values. Values that are our core beliefs, the principles that guide why we do what we do, and they reflect what we care about most as a group. And they include equity, inclusion, transparency, empathy, respecting others, and integrity. Can I get a volunteer to read the norms?
Let's see. Norm. Sure. Assume good intent. Be mindful of impact. Own your impact as well. Do you want me to go through the whole thing?
Mm-hmm, please.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah. Don't take it personally. People speak in drafts, and drafts are messy. Discuss what, not why. Be specific and be helpful. Let people find the way to their points. Willingness to learn. Listen with the intent to understand. Using I statements, so speaking from your own experience, and leaving space for feelings.
Great. Excellent. So moving right along, and also if anybody at any point feels like they want to add or edit those, we can certainly have a conversation about that. Okay, so next item on the agenda. So just following up on the scope of the City Seal Task Force, I did hear back from City Council about this. I think it was specifically Alphonse's question around clarifying, oh, we just lost,
Oh,
oops, we just lost Aditi, so okay, I'll just pause for a second to hopefully she gets back on. But in the meantime, I will look for the email. Because we just lost quorum. So I'll just give her like a couple minutes, but in the meantime, I'll look for the email. Oh, there it is. There she is. Um, yeah, so it was specifically in response to Alphonse's question around are we as a task force being asked to determine whether the city should adopt a new seal, or are we being asked to develop a new seal, right? Because it was a little bit of vague language. And as a follow-up, like if we were to develop a new seal, would there be budget available to support that process? So the answer was that from Conrad Prasnewski, Councilor Prasnewski, City Council President, was that the task force was put together to see if we should change the city seal or keep it the same. So we're not designing a new seal. That would be a separate process. I did hear back from the mayor as well. And he had a little bit more feedback. He said that according to the order, there's two components that the task force would report on. The first would be evaluating the City of Salem City Seal, describing its history, the elements of it, why some in the community wish to change it and wish to keep it the same, etc. And then the second part is developing recommendations for potential modifications to said seal, is to outline options for the city council to consider should they wish to change the seal. So in other words, he wants us to come up with ideas. Like if we do end up saying we want to change the seal, he wants us to have like at least a starting point for the city council to consider around what we think a process for changing the city seal should look like, perhaps some ideas around symbolism or what we could change it to, right? But we're not being tasked to actually change it. So I'll pause there for questions and comments. And Aditi, I will forward you these emails just for minute purposes so you can have the exact language.
So just to be sure I understand, we're just, because it's a little still vague, like even though we've gotten more clarity, there's still room for interpretation, let's say. So would that mean like we would offer a description or maybe like a list of symbols? And maybe it's also up to us to think about as we proceed, like what is our ultimate kind of takeaway design wise?
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty vague. You're right. Like it's the guidance that the mayor said. Yeah, like the mayor gave, sorry, the guidance that the mayor gave us was to outline options for the city council to consider should they wish to change the seal. So options could be a lot of things, right? So I think he just more than anything wants us to at least start a conversation about it and give the city council some ideas as to like next steps. Alphonse.
Oh, thank you, Nina. Yeah, kind of just to echo that, it sounds like maybe some guidelines for creating the next seal, if that is what we decide is our recommendation, instead of specifics, I think would be an easier thing for us. So we found like, say we find certain things to be problematic, let's in the guidelines avoid this symbolism, perhaps leaning towards this symbolism. That's how I'm hearing it, but
Yeah, and I think that's an accurate take. Any further discussion before I move on? Great. Okay. So we can move on. All right. So just a follow up regarding the shared drive that we discussed in the previous meeting. I did create a ticket for it in the city. IT is working on it. I sent them 2 follow-up emails in the last couple of weeks, and I have not received a response. So I will keep, I will keep sending emails to IT until I get a response, but it has not been created yet. And hopefully we can get it up and going by the next meeting. I was hoping I'd have at least an update for you all today or on that task, but unfortunately IT hasn't gotten around to it. I am aiming to have it up and running by the next meeting, so I'll try to make sure of that on the city side so we can start so we can start uploading documents and we can all start reading information about the seal. Yeah, and of course I wanted to discuss a process for uploading and organizing materials, but since it hasn't been created yet, we can't do that. So that's the update. Any questions there?
I have one.
Okay.
So for example, like the presentation that I'm gonna be giving later this meeting, should I just hold on to that until we have the drive folder, or should I put it in our email chain so it lives there? Or
Yeah, well, I think you can share it. Definitely share it to a DD so with a DD so she can include it in the minutes, right? And yeah, I think like we can just go from there and we'll upload it to the drive once we have it. But that's a good point. All the presentations should go on the drive at one point.
right.
Aditi, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought I was not muted. Um, I was gonna also ask the recordings, the presentations is also gonna be part of this recording, right? So it will be available to everyone in the public and everything once the recording's uploaded. In addition to that, we're talking about having the presentation be on a shared drive elsewhere, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay,
And that's
thanks.
mostly so that people don't necessarily have to watch a video and, they can just access it whenever. Okay, I think that's it for that agenda item, correct? Okay, great. All right, so next up on the agenda, open meeting law reminders. So I think IT did get around to creating City of Salem emails for everyone. Any questions there? Did anybody struggle with that? I am hoping to switch to using those emails instead of your personal emails sometime soon. So was everybody able to access the salem.com account? Aditi, did you say no questions or?
I don't have any questions. I'm just gonna follow up on it. It's
Okay,
been kind of a busy week, so.
great. Yeah, I mean, as long as you get to it, probably this week would be great. Because at some point I want to completely stop using your personal emails. And that is because it is, even if you're using your personal email, it is a public record, right? So if there was a public record request, like we would essentially have to pull it from your personal email. So that's why it's cleaner to just have a salem.com address. And the mayor just in a recent meeting reminded me of this, that it's just better for everyone and better in terms of privacy concerns, right? If there was a FOIA request.
And this is
Okay.
just for, oh,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
ignore me. This is just for anything that like relates to, so all of our Zoom, but like also any emails that we have to the city, all of that.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so so in other words, anything relating to this task force is subject to FOIA. Okay. Anything else? Okay, we can move on. Cool. All right, so the next item on the agenda is to have a follow-up discussion around our public engagement strategy. I know that we talked about you know, what different community engagement methods can look like, whether that's community discussion, surveys, input tools, public input sessions. And so I just wanted to open up the floor for a follow-up to that discussion. We are going to talk subsequently about just addressing misinformation that's been occurring in the community about our role in our process, as well as vote on a feedback form. So I just wanted to open the floor up for discussion for those items.
So, I wrote up like just a draft letter that we can look at, and I had to run that by the mayor's office in order to present to you. But I was thinking it might be nice to put out some kind of very short public announcement about what we do, right? Like kind of the parameters of our, um, we can't change the seal. I think that's a big thing that people don't necessarily know. But also then at the same time to kind of outline what our plan is and to invite people to some of these info sessions and listing sessions. So I could share that with you guys if you want to start with that, but also if anyone else has anything to say, like please jump in and I can wait.
Well, I can say from the emails that Rahina forwarded all of us, I think it's definitely needed, the public input. I think there should be some structure around it, certainly, but I think this is kind of why we're here to chat about that.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. I should have, I should have framed that in the context, but I think it just skipped my mind. But yes, I did forward, at the mayor's request, all of the emails that I've received relating to this task force. So, because I think that is part of the public input. So I wanted you all to see those and, hopefully, moving forward, if we do decide to approve this feedback form, it won't just come to me, it'll come to all of us by default. But if I do continue to receive any emails, just as the chair or as the City of Salem contact, I'll forward those to all of you.
I also am curious about like I think that public engagement and feedback is important. And I would love to explore options that sort of we are able to access a lot of different people because like emailing somebody assumes that you have a computer, that you have an email address. Like there are all these steps along the way that you have to utilize in order to access, being able to email us, And so I feel like we need a breadth of modalities that we utilize in order to get different kinds of feedback and from different communities and people in Salem. Right now, I think most of the feedback is coming in terms of these emails that we're receiving. I wish that there were more ways or, you know, platforms that we could utilize. So we could have like more people, like a variety of people give us feedback.
Well,
Yeah,
also, I think one of the things that all of the digital methods, the email and the even the sending the form back puts distance between us and the other Salem residents. I'm not opposed at all to having a meeting where we're present in real life and they are too. So that people can actually come in. And I think people, when you're talking to another human face to face, there's just more openness and more, you can see that it's a fellow human being, and there's less of
there's
that.
impact. Mhm.
that internet kind of anonymity thing that happens.
Mm. Good point. Yeah, and I think right now at least we're considering a two-pronged approach, right? Like we're gonna have a public input form on the City of Salem website to receive feedback on a rolling basis, right? In addition to that, I think we're also considering um having a few public input sessions, kind of like what you're describing, Suzanne, where all we do is you know, we schedule 2, 3, 4 meetings or however many we decide on, where all we do is listen to public input, right? And people can sign up and we can uh you know, we can allocate as much time as is needed for that.
Hmm.
Um
Oh, Suzanne, you're muted.
I think we should have that after we've had the presentations, because I think people not knowing what we're about after we're going to have 4 presentations, I think, total.
at least. Oh, at least, yeah.
That's going to give people a lot of information to comment on. Like right now, if they comment, they're going to be commenting on their assumptions or expectations or imaginations. And once we've had the chance to sort of offer specifics, they'll have more to give feedback on, I think.
Yes, and I think that's part of why we've been approaching it the way we have, right? Is we're you know, we're barely starting the process. Like today we're going to get 2 presentations from you and Vijay, right? Next meeting we'll be hearing from Michael Feener, potentially Rachel, and then as well as Eileen, and we're going to bring in more experts and more historians. So we're really starting the process of learning about the seal and its history, right? So I think you're right. Like it is a little early to be commenting on the process, right? When we have barely touched the subject matter. But I still think, you know, it's worthwhile to just start getting input on a rolling basis and I think that's why a form might be helpful. It's just to get it in a more constructive manner.
Yes, but oh, sorry, Vijay, were you about to say
No,
something?
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I guess I just want to say I'm not sure that like I know that we are about to start the presentations, and I think that you're right, it is early days, but I wish more people knew that we were doing this, because I'm under the impression that only a small number of people are aware that we are of who we are and what we're doing and what our aim is. And I think that I mean, I think that it would be great to be more transparent and just raise more awareness. Like Aditi was saying, does that mean that, you know, we're trying to not only just have like a digital form that you can fill out, but also, you know, put out flyers like a community center or like the local library, somewhere that people can see if they're not necessarily online, or like, I don't know, even like if we post something on the city website, how many people who are just regular people in Salem actually go to the city website? You know, like I
Yeah.
have to say, I'm sorry, but I never did before this. Um, and I just want to, I would love to reach out to people authentically and have them be part of this, you know, because we're about to embark on this like really exciting, you know, learning experience together, and we don't want to just share it at the very end. I think it's great if they can join earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Like I think a lot of people don't know about these conversations, right? And to Aditi's point, there's a certain yeah, there are barriers to accessing this information. There are very real barriers. It requires you to have you know, the know-how of like knowing that this conversation is even happening and where to look for the information, right? We are trying to make it as publicly available by publishing on the website and making it accessible, right? But it's still like, you know, you have to speak English, you have to have reliable internet access, you have to have a computer or a phone. Like we know that all of these barriers are very real, and there's a lot of people we're not hearing from, right? And also, you know, these meetings happen on at 4 p.m. on a Monday, right? Which is not super convenient. But you know, that's why we make the recordings available. And hopefully for the public input sessions, we'll be, you know, we'll pick more convenient times for people.
I also think that, like, I know that last time we met, I think Alphonse had talked a little bit about like farmers market and like utilizing in-person methods to collect more opinions and, you know, thoughts, or even if, yeah, have you heard about like what are the Salem SEAL Task Force and what we're doing, or, you know, um, you know, have you looked at like the city seal? What's your opinion on it? Or come to our presentations and things like that. If there was some way of more engagement, that would be great. Um, it would be nice to get, you know, as much feedback throughout the process rather than to wait till the very end. Um,
I love
Yeah,
the farmer's market idea. I think because there's so much to do down there, and you could just go be enjoying some fresh strawberries and stop by the table and get a flyer and talk to one of us. I love that.
I mean, we can certainly make that happen, right? So as soon as the market, yeah, as soon as the farmers markets start, when do they start, by the way? I never know off the top of my
Ours
head.
is later than Marblehead is after Memorial Day, but ours is usually a week or two after Marblehead it starts. So
Well,
probably
we can figure it out. And whenever they start, we can get an email and going and hopefully coordinate, you know, some coverage there, and we'll talk about it next meeting. So I'll just make a habit to continue this discussion. So I'll just put this agenda item again next meeting so that we don't lose this thread around getting more public engagement and having more creative ideas on how to involve members of the public who we may not be reaching.
Can I say, I think what Rachel brought up with that letter, I think would actually act as a good, almost like frequently asked questions sheet. Because I can tell from the emails that you forwarded, Rahina, there were questions in there that I feel like should be answered, but also I think we're going to be getting those questions a lot unless someone has, you know, unless someone's got, you know, received that answer, which if it's in a video recording, it's very loose and, you know, it's not something you can point someone toward to be like, this is our purview. This is what we were tasked to do. Sure, it might be long, but at the end of the day, that information is at least there and it's set down on paper and someone can search it if they want to find it. Instead of every meeting having to answer the same question of why are you changing the seal? Well, okay, we're not. This is the process that was laid out. But I feel like we're going to get those questions a lot by opening it up. The same question a lot, I should say, by opening up, you know, public input at every meeting type of thing, which I'm not against, but I just also want to make sure that we're efficient and we're not getting the same questions over and over and over if we have a way to answer that easy enough.
yeah. And I think that a lot of people who are weighing in opinions, if you join halfway through a meeting, the conversation could have a very different flavor than what it was at the beginning of a meeting, especially when you're going into such an in-depth analysis. Like we're spending 18 months doing this. I don't foresee every single citizen of Salem watching every single 90-minute recording in the next 18. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe a handful of
it's not
people, but
realistic.
not everybody. I wouldn't, you know, so if there is a reference point somewhere, that would be great, you know.
I love the
Absolutely.
idea of a fact sheet. I think that's we're also trained to be able to use those and look for those and read those and then also you don't have to have a long-winded thing if you don't want to get through it. You can just go find the thing that you're looking for.
Right. That's great.
Does anybody want to start drafting a fact sheet?
But I
I could,
guess Oh, okay, sorry. I just wanted to say, I feel like in a way there should be multiple there should be summaries of each presentation because most people are not going to listen to an hour long or even a 30-minute presentation or even a 20-minute presentation. You know what I mean? So I just feel like if we have, let's say we do have the shared drive, we have our like mission statement basically, which lays out what we're doing. But then we're like, okay, here's what we've been doing. And then there's like dated presentations. And then, you know, because they're also presenting very different points of view. And we want to be able to show that succinctly, right? Not like, yeah, and not like here's 5 video recordings that are an hour
Yeah.
long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I love the idea of a fact sheet. We can make it publicly available. We can make it easy to read. We can print it out and, you know, have it at the farmers markets with like a QR code to the public input form. That feels very doable, right? We can then also just, you know, once we start going through the presentations, I think it does make sense to just even just summarize what each presentation is about so that and put it into one document or whatever format we think is best for the public, right? So that they can refer back to certain recordings or like look for certain material that they may be interested in, right? And see what's available in maybe one document. I think that that sounds good to me. Um, so okay, I think just for the sake of moving the conversation forward, if like a good next step might be like drafting that fact sheet and I guess just creating a few bullet points for each presentation that we have. Um, does anybody want to volunteer to do the fact sheet? We can all make edits.
What if we just write our own? Like BJ and I can just write our own little IMBD summary, plot summary of our
Yeah, if
presentation.
you're of the presentation, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
great, is to just have each
Because
presenter do
nobody
it.
understands it and what the most important points are like we do. I mean, um, and I'm happy to do that with mine. Mine's short though, but
Yeah. And same for
Perfect.
mine. I think as well, you know, and Rahina, you kind of went through it in the last meeting about sort of giving a history of the task force. How was it started? How was it then formed? Like, what are the steps that got us to where we are right now? And I'm guessing every meeting, this sheet would almost be updated. Which I guess that's where Aditi pulling, you know, the minutes we could pull from that. So we're not rewriting everything. So it's almost like we're creating an aggregate of the information that's already there, but it's on one sheet, and we just add to
Perfect.
it at each meeting.
That sounds great. That, yeah. Okay. I
Can I
think,
quickly ask
oh yeah.
a question about this? Do we want to consider making any kind of a public announcement about the purpose of the task force and kind of the history of the task force as we talked about, like the letter?
Yes,
Does it
yeah.
make
So I
sense
think,
for an announcement from the mayor's office, or is it like I don't know how these things are historically done, or what is the best way to, like, is it, do we do it in the papers, or is, I don't know, I'm asking.
yeah, so that was actually the next thing on the agenda. So I just wanted to make sure that we just close that, close this topic before we move on. Like anything, what I'm hearing about the public engagement is like, let's keep this item continuously on the agenda so we can continue to talk about it as things come up. And the few action items from today's meeting are we want to create a fact sheet as well as like an ongoing document of the presentations with like as Suzanne said, IMBD summaries, so just like, here's what you need to know from each presentation. and the people who create the presentations can author them. Alphonse.
Thank you, Hina. So I was trying, sorry, I was trying to remember who said this at the last meeting, and it was actually you, Hina, that we set specific points in the timeline to engage with the public. So after a benchmark, we have one of our engagement sessions. So I guess my question is, where do we delineate? Like, what is a benchmark for the process? Do we do it do we do it on a calendar basis? Do we do it after significant information has been shared? Like, what is our formula for calculating when we put in a public engagement session?
Really good question.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm open to feedback. I think we should just do it consistently on a calendar basis, just to, just for predictability's sake of like, okay, we're coming up on every 4 months, we're gonna have one. We're coming up on 4 months, so let's plan that. Yeah, I don't know what people think. That was just kind of me thinking off the top of my head.
I really like the calendar basis. It does add that that uniformity, that kind of expectation for people to get their thoughts together and get familiar with the material that has been shared. And I think 4 months, that gives us 3 a year. That's pretty good.
In addition to, if we do this farmer's market thing, and the fact sheet, there's all of these, I think would work together to hopefully make the comments that come in a bit more precise, let's say.
Perfect.
Yeah, maybe we could have our first one like after either the first round or the second round of presentations, like because it's been a certain amount of time, and also because then there's been some information that's come to light. So there's something to talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think having it every 4 months makes sense. So the first one would be June at the end of, we can do it at the end of June. So maybe after June's presentations, I think that makes sense. And we can just plan it every 4 months after that. So we would have 4 feedback sessions total, which I think is a good number. Okay. So next meeting, we'll talk about how we want those sessions to go, and we'll talk logistics and timing and location. Like, do we want them over Zoom, hybrid? What do we want that to look like? So maybe think about that between now and then. All right, is that part of the conversation complete before we move on? Great. Okay, so I think next up, Rachel did draft sort of I guess I'm calling it a press release. I don't know if that's the term we're going
I think that's actually a very good way of describing it.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no chat that I can drop it into, is there? It's because
No,
it's recorded.
yeah, and it's an open meeting law violation, so we can't have chats. But what I did do is I put it on a slide so I can share my screen. So I did have time to do that.
Okay, amazing. So this is just a rough draft, and like I would love for all of you to, like, if you have a thought to change anything or add something, like, please, this is the moment where it's just like a ball of, clay.
I imagine you're seeing my screen, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think
Okay, great. Confirming.
Nice.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
No notes.
No notes. My note is to just add if we vote on the form and we approve it, to add it to this.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
mean, I
agreed.
don't know if we want to mention the in-person, like, casual sessions as well. right? Because we still haven't really decided all of our feedback opportunities.
You
Well, we
mean the
can
farmer's
update
market?
that once that becomes more concrete, we can update it or change it, Rachel.
That's true. Yeah.
This is a great jumping off point, I think.
I do agree that we should include all, if this is the press release in this case, including all opportunities for how the public can make their voice heard. Since in most instances, I suppose this is going to be that static thing that's out there on the internet that a lot of people are going to refer back to. So to include as much as possible, I think would be good. Even if we do end up updating it in the future, who's to say someone's not working off of an old version of it, let's say.
Well, and I think it's worth one of the senses I got from the emails was that everyone's assuming it's going to, that it's going to look like the city council meetings, where someone speaks for a certain number of minutes before or at the end or whenever they do that. And I don't see this as being like the city council meetings as being the model for this at all. So we could maybe address that a little bit in there.
Yeah, that's true. And I think maybe the combination of, that fact sheet and then this press release. I mean, I'm wondering if we can link to that fact sheet. If that fact sheet is going to be constantly updated, this would be the static thing that's out there, but that link will always go toward a document that is going to be, updated as we go along each meeting. So that we don't have to worry about this being outdated because some new information came up that we didn't include on this first draft or this first release.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Oh, I just wanted to say one more thing, which is maybe that fact sheet, and I'm happy to help with this, should be more like kind of like a visually an infographic. Like I want just people who don't have a lot of time to read and, just something that you can just quickly scan, and is very like accessible and more friendly to just a wider range of people, like the people who want to read are gonna like get in there or watch all 5 to 10 hours of video, that we have. But for everyone else, like here's something, like I said in the letter, just something accessible and something, something that invites them to take part.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
that's why
I completely agree. I think I think the only challenge is a logistical one. Like, when do we want to put this out? And will the fact sheet be ready by that time? I don't know when the drive will be ready, so I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I can't include a link to that because it doesn't exist yet.
Hmm.
Um, so like, if anything, we can include the link to the feedback form because that's pretty much ready to go if we approve it. And we can also include the fact sheet if we can like aim to have it by the end of the week. But other
Hmm.
than that, I don't know if I can include like yeah, I know I don't know when the drive will be ready, and I don't know. Well, I guess we can also include the other ongoing document we talked about, and I can figure out how to do that.
Right. I mean, I also have a question about like how are we like where is this press release? So if it's on a paper, it's on an actual newspaper, then we don't necessarily need all those information, right? Like even if it's online, readable, But if it's on the Salem.gov website somewhere, then those can be hyperlinks that can be actively updated as we add more information. Um, because if we have a schedule of, say, all the listening sessions and all the times we're going to be at the farmers market and or any other additional ways of doing outreach for public engagement and conversations, then we can keep updating a hyperlink of a schedule. Because like 18 months is a long time. So like we can say the next 3 months, for the next 3 months, for the next 6 months, this is how we're going to do it and where all we're going to be. Um, and then update it if it's on the website somewhere. If it's just a news release, we can be more succinct and we don't have to give out all the information to say, go to the Salem.gov's website to look at it, or, you know, find the flyer at the library. We're gonna have the, you know, we're gonna be at the farmer's market. Maybe that's something we can decide today or by next meeting, like at least the next step, rather than the whole like 18 months of it, you know? At least just to give like a preview if we're trying to get information out and make an announcement, you know?
Yeah, and I guess also just to walk people through like what is typically done on the city side for press releases is we typically just publish them on the news section of the city website, and we publish them on social media, like so the city socials, which typically include Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, maybe I might be missing one or two. Um, and then sometimes, depending on depending on the information, I guess, and how intriguing it is, it gets picked up by the Salem News. So the Salem News will then like grab the press release and publish it, right? We can also just reach out to the Salem News and see if they can include it, but that's kind of how it would work on the city side. And I guess I should also say, like, it's not limited to just the Salem News. It could be picked up by other news outlets like the Patch or whatever the case might be.
I think that sounds okay to me. I guess just to slightly respond to what Aditi was saying, maybe what we could do is we could create this, I don't know, I'm envisioning basically like a poster or something that's pretty graphic, explaining to people what we're doing and inviting them, especially once we kind of decide on a date for our first listening session, and inviting them to come. And then having like a QR code that like links to our documents and our presentations.
Mhm.
So we could do that, like maybe not at the end of this week, but like in a week or two, we could work on that. I'm happy to do, some design work. And then we can then try to do what we're talking about with community centers, with the library, like places where people who don't necessarily go on these platforms that you just described might be able to see it and hear about it.
Yeah. Um, so I guess I have to follow up to all of that. When would we want to publish this? Knowing that we don't have the infographic yet and we would want to include it. And I'm hearing that we want to include things in here in the press release that aren't yet created. So that kind of affects our timeline in terms of like, should we aim to have this by next week or maybe next meeting? What are people thinking?
I mean, by next meeting, we should have, from what I'm hearing, we should have the drive all set up and ready to go by that point. At which
Hopefully,
point,
yes. I'm aiming
yeah,
for that.
exactly, yeah. So if we aim for next meeting, then we should have all the links, the fact sheet, the drive, the uh, the community input, you know, sheet that we're going to talk about. All of that should be then established, so that all that can then be linked to in that. So by next meeting, whether we review the final version of it then all together and make that approval then, and then we can send it out by the end of that meeting, because at that point we'll have enough under our belt, let's say, for what, between the presentations, and that will be our third meeting at that point, or fourth meeting.
Fourth meeting.
Fourth meeting. Um,
I wish there wasn't such a long, on one hand, we all have lives and like many jobs, but sometimes part of me is like, it's kind of a shame to wait a full month. I think I'm torn between like, we should tell people something now because a month is a really long time, right? For us to give people no information. Or we could also just maybe like, I don't know if anyone would be open to meeting every 2 weeks or just doing like a quick, because I think that my thought is, from just my job as working as an artist with many projects, there's this initial rush where you're like, you have to put out a lot of press and you have to establish a lot of systems. And once those systems are finished, it's kind of like pretty, it's almost automatic. And I feel like we're in that process where we're like, okay, we're just coming here, we have nothing, and we're starting from scratch, and we just have to get these systems in place and get out this information. So I guess what I would suggest, or I would ask you guys, you know, with all that's going on in your lives, would anyone be open to just trying to do another meeting in 2 weeks, so that, and that's just an exceptional meeting, so that we can just finish all the stuff. And then from there, hopefully once a month will be enough.
I'm okay with that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that meeting were targeted toward finishing up all these loose ends so that once this goes out, then we can go back to I'm fine with that.
Yeah, me too. Because I think if we have to make the fact sheet, this infographic thing, and sort of have a rough draft of sort of a public engagement, like, are we going to the farmer's market? Okay, if we are, then who wants to sign up for it or whatever, like whatever we decide, if we can all sort of make a final, yeah, I'd be down for that.
Okay, so then, great. This is great. I think this is very doable. Basically, we can just spend one meeting just talking about that to get it done. And it can hopefully be just a shorter meeting because that'll be hopefully the only item on the agenda. And we can do that on the 2nd, June 2nd. Does that on our regular time? So that would be Monday, June 2nd at 4.
It works for me.
Great.
Yeah, me as well.
Works
So
for me.
I'll post the meeting so we can have that and hopefully get that approved. Excellent. I think we got somewhere. Any closing thoughts before we move on to the next topic? Great, and I guess the next topic is kind of related, but it's about approving the feedback form that we were talking about. I did send that out to you all so you could take a look at it ahead of time. So hopefully you had a chance to do that. And so I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, are you able to see it?
Yep.
Yeah, and so I think this little intro right here is just copied and pasted from the City of Salem website about the seal. So it's just a little bit about what it is. And then I just go into a little introduction and a little disclaimer that this is subject to public records. You know, that this is a public records and is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. Of course, if anybody shares like their address on this form, we can redact that to the extent permissible by the law. Okay. And just going right into the questions. I put this in here based on our conversation from last meeting because I do think it matters in the context of this conversation, right? Like you don't necessarily have to be a resident of Salem to give input. Like you will still be able to share your opinion, but it's just kind of useful for us to know who we're hearing from, right? And of course, like you may not live in Salem, but you might work here, right? Like there's plenty of business owners that work here who don't necessarily live here. Or there's people who used to live in Salem and might want to share an opinion. And of course, there's still an option for other. Any comments there? I'll just I'll just kind of go through it and feel free to hop in if you have a comment. Then the next one is just a home address. This is optional. This is an optional field. And I think this is just for us to capture who we're hearing from, right? since we might be hearing very heavily from one neighborhood over another. And yeah, I think that just can helps us get an idea of who we're hearing from. And then how familiar are you with the current seal, which I think is a fair question, right? To, I think, Aditi's point or Rachel's point earlier, some people might not even be aware that this conversation is happening. Some people might not even know what our seal looks like. So I think it's just useful info.
Could I know there is a small version of the seal up at the top here. Is there a way to get maybe a bigger version
So
below?
I really appreciate that. I struggled with this thing for like 30 minutes trying
Yeah,
to get that bigger.
okay.
And I think we would have to switch platforms. I don't think
Hmm,
I was not
okay.
able to figure out a way to do it on Google Forms. Not,
Okay.
it's not Google Forms, I'm sorry. It's what's it called? Microsoft Forms.
Oh,
It's the
the office.
Microsoft version, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. As long as it's there, because I could
Yeah.
imagine people seeing the city logo and thinking that that's what we're talking about. So,
It's tiny, right? Like, and I
yeah.
think, to Suzanne's, well, I mean, she'll talk about this later. I just know because I made the presentation, but Suzanne is going to talk about the importance of scale. And I think this is just and it's just a testament to that, right? Like you can't see the details when the image is so tiny, right? So it is something that I had flagged as an issue and I could not figure out how to make this bigger on this form.
Can you add a link where you go to like a full-sized image? Like in the
Oh, I did
question
not
or
think of
on
that.
the
Yeah, I'll look at that is a good alternative option. I'll think of how to do that. Thanks, Rachel.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very constructive feedback. So thank you for saying that, Vijay.
Mm.
Yeah, I'll figure out a way to give people access to a full res version. Okay. And then, we get right to it. Do you believe the city of Salem should consider changing the seal? No, yes. Why do you feel that way? And then, if the city seal were to be redesigned, what values or themes do you believe it should represent? Um, and again, just another question as a follow-up to that. Are there any specific elements you believe should remain part of the seal if it's redesigned? How would you prefer to stay engaged in future conversations, kind of around like the public engagement strategy? Um, and then just an open-ended question around, is there anything else you want to share? And optional name and email.
Hmm. Rahina, for, number 8, just about the staying informed or be engaged. Email updates. Is there like an email list that people sign up for that they would then get an update from specifically to what we do? Or what would email updates
Oh,
be speaking of if they were to click?
yeah, great question. And I was thinking that we could start an email list for the people that do give us their email address.
Okay.
But I do know
Cool.
that there are people currently signed up to receive the agendas for the
Hmm.
meetings. So I can ask IT about tapping into that list as well and how to do
Okay.
that.
Cool. Yeah. Just want to make sure that because I feel like especially what we were talking about before, just efficiently reaching people that want to be informed, and so they don't have to go to the website or search over the social media or wherever that might be. Um, just like a single source for it all. And if an email is that blast that gets into their, you know, inboxes, I think that'd be great.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
And like another, a kind of on that thread, like, is there a way that we could, I mean, I like the idea of the drive, but maybe we could have a website or like a page on the official website where all that information is like there. Sometimes the drive can be very difficult to navigate, it's like not really meant visually for people to find things. It's just like a list of files.
Yeah. And I imagine we will likely have that exact issue because people are going to just dump a bunch of documents, and then what we're going to see is just like, 100 documents just listed, and I'm sure that's going to be very overwhelming.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, maybe you could ask IT if they would be willing to give us some real estate on the Salem.org, or if we would be allowed to create our own website. That would be pretty easy for me to set up, for example, and we could create an email list in the same thing. But yeah, I don't know. I just want to like, I guess I'm thinking about how design can help people access the information, because I think that is a big deal, and that is a huge problem often with like city and federal infrastructure. They're not made for that.
Yeah, so just in terms of like coming up with a follow-up task, like, do you think we should create our own website? Because I also just don't necessarily, I don't know if yeah, I don't want to have too many things out there, you know what I mean? Like, I do feel like the cities of Salem offers like a nice, at least one-stop shop for like anything relating to the task force. Just look here, and we can add all of these fact sheets to that website. We can work on creating, yeah, like creating as many things that we can post on there. But I guess yeah, I guess I'd want to know, I'd want to hear more about like what would the benefit be of creating an entirely new website, and who would do it. And it sounds like you're offering to do it, but I guess I'm just kind of talking through it.
Yeah, no, I mean I'm just throwing it out there. But it would be like, instead of having a Google Drive, because when we talk about the Google Drive, it's exciting, but it's also like I feel like it's another barrier, because it's not, like we were saying, it's not something that's easy to navigate. So it's not like, it wouldn't be adding something, it would be like instead of, you know. But at the same
Mhm.
time, I haven't seen the city, could we go to it now? I haven't
Yeah.
seen our website for the City Seal Task Force, just so we can understand how that looks. And also maybe like,
Yes.
instead of having a drive, would it be better to have like links with, you know, the name of the presentation, or you know what I mean? Just so people don't have to sift through so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point and question. So this is our website, which we actually just updated. Just fun fact, because our previous website used to be less user friendly. Um, and then you would go to government and boards and commissions. And there we are, City Seal Task Force. So you just click on that. And immediately there's a link for agendas and minutes. Um, and it just has a little bit, a little summary that I think I wrote a while back of what we're doing. Um, and there's a few documents that I made public, including the task force member appointment and the task force order that I shared in our previous meeting. Um, then it's who's on the task force. And then on the left here, we have a link to the recordings. So I was picturing we would have the drive here, like like a link to the drive here, as well as a link to the infographic and a link to, yeah, to whatever else we decide might make sense. And I think we said we also wanted to create like a one pager of all the presentations and yeah, like just summaries of like how to find all of this information. Aditi.
Yeah, so I think that the purpose of the drive is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the purpose of the drive is to basically have a common point where all the information related to our task force, so all the other than the recording, so all the presentations, any kind of like reading list or other information historians and experts present, or any important or key references that we do can, like, what I thought was that that's where it all lives on this drive. And now we can create a sort of like a simpler hyperlinked page, PDF, where people can click and go to any things we want to highlight. And that could be in form of a fact sheet. This was what I was thinking. So um, like that could go on a fact sheet. So the fact sheet after this month could be, say, like Suzanne presented, like here's the link to the presentation. This is what the summary was of the presentation. This is what Vijay presented on, and this is what the summary is. And you click that link and it takes you to the drive where that presentation is, if you want to access the full presentation. That was what my understanding was. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, yeah, I think I don't, yeah, like I think it's right. I just think the link to the drive is, or at least I was intending for the link to the drive to live in the website.
To also be there? Okay. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that, like, I think it matters to be able to, for those who want to, in my opinion, it matters for those who want to access everything all at once, to have a place to go and have it all and have a flood of like 15 million documents if that's what they want. But I think that it also makes sense for us to distill that information in a digestible way for the majority of the folks.
Yes. Yes.
Because like if you get FOIA, you're just anyways gonna have to release or like all the documents, or like if somebody's like, hey, where's like that presentation from like May 2025, and they're asking you this question in February 2026. Well, here you go, Um,
I mean,
Yes.
oh, go ahead, Rena.
Oh, I was just gonna say we can find a way to make that happen and make it as digestible as possible. And I also just want to be mindful of the time. Like I want to get to the presentations. So Rachel, finish your thought and then maybe we can move on getting this to a vote.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it in our meeting in 2 weeks. I think it's, it's another gray area where, again, the idea of community outreach is like something that we have to decide amongst ourselves. And between the farmers market tables, these infographics, I think that these are small but like really significant steps towards getting a larger audience, but it is a lot more work. So it's like, let's just think about it, table it for now, think about how much time we have, how many resources we have, and see like what we can do that's makes sense for everyone.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so to be continued at the next meeting. So bring your thoughts. Okay, so just to move forward, may I entertain a vote to publish the public feedback form on the website? And I don't think I heard any real changes, so it would be as is, with the caveat that I'm going to find a way to include a link to a higher res file of the image.
So moved.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
yeah,
Perfect.
second
And
that.
all those in favor, raise hand. Pucci?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I did actually have a question about the form. Sorry, I'm like driving and trying to do three things at once. But did we want to have those questions that go into the design if our potential scope is only to get to the kind of like yes or no of it all, if that makes sense, versus veering into already trying to get input into
Well, I think per the mayor's email, he did want us to start like getting some ideas as to what a new potential seal or even process could be like. So I think I think it's useful information to start gathering, you know? But if people feel like it's
Does it
beyond our
give the
scope, I
impression
can,
that it's decided, you know, versus this is what we're exploring at this moment? I mean, that's all I want to throw out there.
okay. I mean, we can certainly take the questions out if people would prefer that.
I don't know. I personally don't think it gives the impression we've decided. I think it's just like, it feels like a lot of questions that we just have, which is where we are at the moment. But I mean, maybe it's just personal opinion. Maybe we could vote on it if it feels like we're already swayed in one way or not.
Well, then, okay, I can just here, let me just share my screen so you know what I'm talking about. I can take out, sorry, let me start over. So this is our form. I can take out questions 6 and 7 per Pucci's feedback. Or I can leave them in, whatever people feel is best.
Mm,
I think if part of our scope is to come up with guidelines, should we decide to recommend a change? I agree, like having uh, a head start on this uh, is not a bad idea. So I'm for leaving them in.
yeah, I also think that if someone wants to say, no, I don't think this city seal should be redesigned, cannot really say, like, there's no character, like, limit to what you can type or, right?
Correct. Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Okay, so I'm hearing let's leave them in. Okay, so, okay, I guess let's just redo the vote just
I
so,
think one of the things I would say is one of the things I really felt about the emails that we got is that people need to feel heard. And so, like, for example, when I get those haunted happenings surveys, I actually sit down and spend 30 minutes of my time filling it out and sending it back. And I always have this feeling that, like, still nobody heard me or read it or so I like the idea that people even if it's just the people that were concerned enough to write to the mayor need to feel heard, that they have a form to fill out and be a little more organized with their thoughts and send it back to us and we'll read that.
Yeah, I also think that that moment where you're like, if there is there anything that you think should be kept, I think that that's a great opportunity for someone who doesn't want to change his seal to talk about what is most important to them, you know? And I would actually love to hear that.
yeah, because maybe, maybe people are gonna say, I really love the fact that there's a dove because I love that we're the city of peace and doves represent peace. Like that to me would be valuable feedback to receive. Vijay, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna, is there, because we're talking about this fact sheet as a way to help inform some of these comments, is there a way to link to that? Like a link to the live sheet that gets updated as a way to say, hey, before you go through this, here's where we are currently.
That's a good idea.
Is that
Okay.
possible?
Because there's a lot of misinformation and knowledge and lack of knowledge of what's going on out there and I think that's a good way before you answer the survey to give you some really quick, succinct, condensed information.
Yeah,
Hey,
I'm beginning to think we're linking to all these other documents within documents and maybe like let's have that conversation next meeting when we'd really dive into this and we can like really just focus on that. But right now, like I think we want the infographic in the drive, and then we want the infographic to be on the website, and then we want the public input form to link to, you know what I mean? Like I just think we need to think this through and just because I'm getting kind of like a little overwhelmed and a little confused as to like what we're linking where. So let's just approve the form, and then next meeting we can figure out what's the best way to get this out there, and like what's the and I'm sorry, Vijay, I don't mean to. I realize that maybe I'm getting a little bit like frustrated because I'm just like, let's approve the form, but I guess your concern is very valid. You know, I'm just like trying to be mindful that we're linking to a lot of things.
Well, I'm thinking, it's more a lot of links to one thing. It's
Mhm.
more putting one link a bunch of places so that when people do come to give input, they're all going to get funneled to the one sheet, regardless of where they give the input from. So that's sort of where it's not necessarily a bunch of different links. It's just the one link that would be continually
I
out
see.
there. But placing that link in multiple different areas, because I can easily see an outdated piece of information getting circulated around there, but it's been updated, but no one's going to know that. That's
That's a
sort
good
of what I'm
point.
thinking
Right.
about.
So you're almost talking about like a living document that kind of keeps constantly get updated, and there's a hyperlink to it, like a clickable link to it. And wherever we click, it takes us back to that one document that tells you like as of May 19, 2025, this is where the process is at.
Because I could
Okay.
imagine when people give input, we're going to see when that input comes in. And if some of that input has already been covered by something that was in that fact sheet from a previous date, well, it's kind of like, well, that's already answered, and we can send you to that. If you click that link there and go to this date, you'll see your question is answered.
Well, what if there's a link on the fact sheet that says, and would you like to fill out our survey from the, so that way they will have read it. And then the last thing is, would you like to fill out a short survey?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
I was
sorry.
envisioning adding a QR code to that just purely for the purpose of like if we print it out for uh yeah, just for sharing at the farmers market, it can include a link to the form. Um, but I think, yeah, let's just vote to approve the form, and then we can really dive into this next meeting and see how we're gonna do this. Because yeah, I think VJ's right. Like we need to find a way to connect everything to the same place, right? Over and over again. Okay, so with that, may I entertain a motion to approve the form? And I think as is, with the caveat that we're gonna make it uh link to a bigger version of the seal.
Yes,
So moved by Aditi.
I'm
Can
also.
I get a second?
I second it.
All those in favor, raise hand. All right, and Poochie, are you in favor
Yes.
or against? Okay, so unanimous. Perfect. Great, so we can move on. Thank you all. That was very good feedback. And next up, Vijay, you're gonna present to us. So our long-awaited first presentation of the task force.
Oh
Yay!
boy! All right,
So
here we
yeah,
go.
and just for everybody who may be watching the recording, Vijay is one of our historians, so he is presenting in that capacity, is as one of the historians on the task force. So with that, Vijay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rena. All right, let me share my screen here. Get this up to. Can you all see this? History of the Salem City Seal. There we go. Yep. Perfect. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone, both that are on the call and who might be watching this in the future. My name is Vijay Joyce. I'm one of the historians here on the task force, and I'm here to present on the history of the Salem City Seal, sort of how we got to what we see here in a way. Before we start there, though, we do have to start with the fact that the seal itself, because it came in 1839, it was not the first seal that would ultimately encompass Salem. As before the community we know of as the city of Salem, which is the driver for creating the seal, we were just the port. We were the port of Salem. really, in a way. And they were varied seals that were used throughout that time as a port. And of course, these were just as a way to, usually on legal documents, as it says here, I pulled out this quote from this great book, sort of proper identification to lend an official aspect to documents, something especially that couldn't be easily, forged or anything of the sort. And so that's where we get a lot of these complex designs. I kind of really like the one in the bottom right corner there, where it's all things are uncovered, and there's an eye literally overlooking 13 stars for the. It's pretty cool. So that's covering the port, as it says there, the port of Salem and Beverly. So the collector of the port specifically. So it really had a lot to do more about the for legal documents, especially when it comes to like customs information and things of the sort. There were a lot of those seals out there. But of course, once Salem becomes a city, we need a seal. And that was something where in 1836, Salem voted, or the city, or the state, the governor had put forward an act to establish the city of Salem. And in doing so, then it's also required to have a seal, again, for official documents to make sure that it all went back toward one spot. And it's interesting that right at pretty much, 1836 is when the act came in. 1838 is when they start to talk about a seal, and they describe things because, they're getting more they're focused a lot of their time on getting the operations of the city up and running. So the seal itself took about 2 years before it was even considered. And it's also interesting that they pretty much immediately introduced an order where they kind of designed the seal as they would have seen it right then and there. And what I sort of just created this very quick mock-up of what they were talking about based upon this ordinance, describing in the center is the word Salem enclosed in an olive wreath and a circle around the margin with the words founded September 1628, city incorporated 1836. And so that was ultimately established as sort of an initial seal. It was never adopted because what we then shortly after get, in fact, it's right at the next meeting of the city council in 1838, is the fact that, and I really just wanted to call out the pertinent information here, but as the seal of the city, once engraved, will probably be used by the corporation as long as it shall continue to exist without alteration. And your committee are of the opinion that the subject should be carefully and fully considered before the city council act finally in relation to it. So that seal that came before that initial draft there was looked upon and sort of thought, okay, maybe we need to think more about this. And that's exactly where the city records, of which just an aside, we are very lucky to have all this information for a city so old as we have. So it's pretty incredible that all this is readily available to us. So this was considered, and that actually kicked off almost a years-long process of trying to determine what would be the proper, what they considered device, quote unquote, of the seal itself. So we get about nearly a year later, we get the report of the committee that was established to create a seal, in which they report that, as I highlighted here, an allusion to the chief source of our commercial prosperity would be the most appropriate, as well as perhaps the only feature which could well be chosen. They concluded also that an allusion to the name of the city as a dwelling place and city of peace would be appropriate. So this is what's put out there by this report or by this committee, of which there were the, let's see, I want to say it was the 5 members. Just to go back right at the bottom there, I've said Henry K. Oliver, Ward 4, William Hunt, Ward 2, David Putnam, Ward 4, were appointed. And then you have the alderman, George Peabody, and Samuel Holman Jr. Joined in as well. So this is the report that they ultimately come up with as far as what they deem to be important to depict the city on this seal in this form. And so from there, we ultimately then get the first design of the seal, pretty close to what we see here today. By that, I mean pretty close to what we have as the city seal as it stands at this moment. In which case it says described and highlighted here, in the center thereof, a shield bearing upon it a ship under full sail, approaching a coast designated by the costume of the person standing upon it and by the trees near him as a portion of the East Indies. And then above the shield, a dove bearing an olive branch in her mouth. So speaking to what the report had recommended, which was an allusion to the chief source of our commercial prosperity at this time in 1839, Salem is very much involved with a lot of the East Indies trade. East Indies is what we would now call essentially the South Asia, particularly. And this sketch, as it was first brought up, you see some words like Salem is Solima, which is the German, or not German, what am I saying? The Latin version of the city. And then, of course, they put the date of 1628, and then the city being founded in 1836. And so this was a sketch put forward by George Peabody, as he would relate not too long later, about 30 years later, and I'm sort of reminiscing about creating and sketching up this seal for them. So this is what gets presented to the city council of those elected officials. And they don't make too many changes. In fact, really all they do is they put the English version of Salem in place of the Latin version. And they had a long discussion about whether the year of Salem's founding is 1628 or 1626. And so this is something where, there's a whole thing, George Peabody right here in the corner. I'm not going to read all this, but because this is recorded, those that are looking at it, you can certainly read it more in detail. But it's really more about, what was the original founding of Salem? And they kind of come across it as 1626, as that was when it was by, the committee, in their opinion, thought that it would be the period of foundation as the town should be what it was. Versus 1628, that's ultimately when you have George Endicott coming over and establishing his tenure here. So those are really the two changes that almost immediately get made. And otherwise, for the most part, it then goes through a few instances of city council. The city council process is that they introduce something, they will vote on it a couple times, sort of like this idea of taking some time in between in order to allow for some thought and to be brought forward as a way for other people to give their comment and maybe make changes as it might be. We're also dealing here with 1839, so they don't have Zoom or anything like that, and instantaneous communication is also very much lacking back then as well. But so having these seemingly very long moments in between these decisions being made really has a lot to do with the idea of wanting to make sure that these important decisions are going to take time. At which point, this March 11th of 1839 is an important date, because that is ultimately what is then referred to a little over a month later as being the device, as they call it, of the city seal that is ultimately going to be adopted. So they all agree, as is passed on March 11th, creating this device in 1839 as a representation of what this city should be. Now, what's interesting is sort of seemingly how quick the seal gets presented and then passed upon. But it also should be noted, which is why the next few slides I wanted to include sort of the context of the Salem seal amongst the other seals in the state at the time, and that specifically to their point about how the device should be the chief source of their commercial prosperity. We see that in a lot of other city seals that get established either concurrently at that same time or shortly after. So, for example, you can see here, I'm not going to read them all, but it gives you an idea of the other city seals, what they're talking about, as the city seal would be a representation of, and seemingly in time in memoriam, the representation of the city and pretty much what made it famous, what made it successful. New Bedford here, they talk a typical view about 1857, which was the golden age. And so you see things like the city skyline in the background. And then, of course, up front, there's a whaling ship, there's a steamship showing the new technology of the age. And you get things like with Newburyport, they add a bunch of different things in. They had a number of devices covering different phases of the city's history, as we see here. And that's pretty common. In fact, even in Brockton, you'll see there's like the beehive up above represents industry, the globe represents education, the electric light progress. So they're really trying to fit a lot of what they want their city to be known for, and combined with some of that history in there as well. And so it really did have a lot to do with sort of how people perceived the city itself, and especially how they want other people to perceive it as a place of success and things of the sort. So here's just some more. Groton is interesting in that they intend to typify the character of the inhabitants in their seal, and that's why you have like faith and labor, things like that. Gloucester, the schooner, the type of ship, the schooner was invented in Gloucester, and so they're very proud of that in a way. And it should be noted as well that there is an often quoted line, and I find this throughout a lot of discussion around city seals, and it came from the Essex Institute, where in 1866, this person who I've drawn a lot of the research from has described, where I'll just reading about or describing exactly the idea of what a city seal should be, in which I'll quote in full here. The design upon the seal of a city should be unique in that it may not resemble that borne by the seal of any other city. It should, if possible, be characteristic also, so that it could not fitly be borne by the seal of another city, for it is an enduring link between the past and the future. It may bear upon its face an epitome of the city's history, which carries down to a remote posterity. While books perish and monuments crumble, the seal is among the most imperishable of memorials. Being multiplied in large numbers and in a variety of lasting material, a design perpetuated in this form is well nigh indestructible. Thus, we have seals which time has spared us from the earliest civilizations, and collections of such works commemorating eminent men and great events form a most valuable chapter in the history of civic progress as well as of art. And so that is the line that is ultimately preceding the thoughts on the Salem seal, which was, as I've broken up the quotes here, essentially saying its design, so the Salem City Seal design, was not adopted without discussion, occupying many sessions of city government, sometimes protracted beyond midnight. We'll see if our meetings go that long too, and resulting in repeated references of the subject to committees, in the making up of which the scholarship of the infant city was well represented. So this is something where, it should be very well noted that, while the seal of the city seemingly, in the very quick presentation I have just given in a way, seems like it went very quick and went through very fast. But the reality is that months and months, so actually arguably years, went by where people were really, really discussing and getting into the nitty gritty of these. These city council records are a bit sparse, but they do provide us with a sense that it was something that was brought up continually. And so this is where, through all of this, representing Salem, this seal is very much in par with the seals of the time, which were sort of speaking to its commercial prosperity. And it's interesting to note as well, a lot of those other city seals are very much inward looking, if you will. So if I could just go back to those quick, it's a lot of images of the cities themselves. There are sometimes direct copies of a skyline, like New Bedford's here, for example. Others are very much representing their own inward, images of themselves in and of themselves. But Salem City Seal is very much outward looking and speaking to a very worldly idea, which I wanted to point out specifically because in today's world, we're a very worldly society. We're connected, left and right to the other side of the globe, very easily. But back then in 1839, I mean, Salem, in a way, was in the earlier phase of Salem with its ocean-going trade, really was, it was extremely rare to have a place so connected to the outside world in such a way, specifically such an analog way, where the digital way in which we live today, as we might be able to take for granted, did not exist back then. So to have such an outward view of the representation of a city, especially a view that is of the other side of the world as a representation of the city itself, is pretty unique in and of its own right. So with that, that is sort of my quick presentation about the history of the City Seal there. For those watching online, I've linked to all my sources here, at least the ones that provided the bulk of the information. QR codes, you can scan all that. You can also type in the names and the authors into Google, and they'll pretty much pop up pretty quickly there. But pretty succinct, I'd hope. That was sort of, in a way, an overview of the seal. And of course, with our Google Drive, I'll be placing these sources within there as well. And any updates we might have or questions that might come up that would lead to updates, I'll absolutely be including there too. Thank you all very much. Any questions?
Very cool use of QR codes there for references. Hadn't seen
I
that
was thinking
before.
about, like, people are going to be looking at this. How are they going to get this? So they just put their phone up to the screen and boom, So that's kind of the idea with that. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, since no one's jumping in, I do have sort of a comment which is counterintuitive, but I very early on in this conversation, I wondered why we were such a big trader with Asia because we're on the Atlantic, right? So like how it just seemed really counterintuitive, and I just did my own research, and apparently um you know the traders would go through um I think it's called the Cape of Good Hope, like around South Africa and up, which
Yep.
is just an incredibly long voyage. But it was extremely profitable, as you can imagine. And so I just thought that that was something worth highlighting here because I do think it's counterintuitive, like how I think our motto is what is it? I covered it in my, but it's something around like the East Indies, right? And like
Yeah, to the farthest ports to the rich east.
exactly.
Yep.
So
Yep.
worth mentioning.
Yeah, and that had a lot to do with the fact that uh essentially, well, during the revolution, the Britain, of course, is not going to trade with us. So they cut off a lot of their ports to trade with this revolutionary place, which means that right after the revolution, there's a lot of there are a lot of ports that are opened up far afield. And so you see Salem really early on going to places like first the Cape of Good Hope, which is the southern tip of Africa there. And from there, that is a major trading port. The Cape of Good Hope is a huge trading port because that's where a lot of the trade from the east or Asia would come and either resupply or trade at the Cape of Good Hope there, and then either go back or go forward. When I say forward, I mean over into the Atlantic and then up to England and all those European ports. And so what Salem would do is, its history is interesting with trade, especially at this time, because there's no one trading product that Salem would trade in with the East. In fact, in a lot of ways, places like China didn't really need much of anything from us. And so what they would get are the only product you could get locally around here is ginseng, which would come from West Virginia. So the hills of West Virginia, you would have some naturally growing ginseng that they would be able to trade with. But otherwise, they would be essentially leaving Salem, either going straight to the Cape of Good Hope, or more often than not, they would go over right across the Atlantic, kind of hop along the coast, trading up, or just getting cold hard cash, if you will. And eventually you go over to the East Indies, and over there, we're dealing with things, again, commonplace to us, but spices. Black pepper comes from Sumatra or Indonesia in this case. And so black pepper was introduced in bulk to this country through the port of Salem. So you have a ton of money being generated off of this. And you're right, Regina, it is a very, very risky journey, and it takes a very long time, but high risk, high reward. And that's kind of, in a way, where Salem made its mark. It's interesting to note, too, that Salem would go around the Cape of Good Hope, around the southern tip of Africa. Boston goes around the Cape of South America and they both reach the same port. They're both going to China, or at least in Salem's case, more about the East Indies and Sumatra. But Boston would go around South America and trade in the Pacific Northwest for furs. And it was those furs that made them the money. But over in Salem, it was a lot of the just sort of random assortment of goods, things they would trade up for along the coast in Europe. Some of the case in Africa, they would stop over in Arabia, the Middle East today. We get things like the port of Makkah is where the term mocha comes from. Chocolate and coffee mixed together is the port of Makkah is on the tip of in the Middle East Peninsula there. You have in India many different clothes come from that direction. India is like the Paris of Asia when it comes to as far as like setting the trend for fashion and things of the sort. And then spices, of course. We're used to nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves today, but in Salem, you could smell that for likely the very first time wafting in off the wharves, and coffee and things of the sorts. You'd make a lot of wealth in that regard. So high risk, high reward, and that really is what it came down to. But Edie.
I had a question. I also want to ask an open draft, this is a draft thought.
Sure.
I just wondering, the demographic makeup of our City SEAL task force was probably not the case in 1839. And I think and also I want to think about it in a historical context and critically look at, what was the alderman who were the city councilors of the time? Were they mostly, or I'm guessing none of them were women. And I would, I want to give credence to the process being thought through, but we only think through things as critically as the people who we are, and if the makeup of that group is a certain favoring a certain demographic, then we get the outcomes we do from it. So I'm just wondering if you know a little bit about what was the how did they make those were these elected positions, who voted for them, and what was the process at that time?
Yeah, so similar to ours today in a way, democratically elected. A lot of these people were merchants, especially, they had money. There's no two ways about that. They were wealthy people. We also have to, consider too, today people of maybe not great wealth are able to be on task force like this or be on the city council and such. But back in the day, it kind of really was reserved for a lot of the upper class because they had the time to sit on these things and they had the time to be a part of these organizations. But of course, they're also taking it from a understanding that they're representatives, right? So there's that as well. And we can never prove intent necessarily, not from nearly 200 years later. But of course, that I think the imagery and at least from what we understand through the process of finding out the seal, is that because of the protracted meetings about thinking really hard about what this is going to be in time in memoriam, is something that's pretty telling. But of course, we have what we have as far as the information goes. We can certainly try to make assumptions, but that's also leading down a very dangerous path because, to your point, Aditi, we're making assumptions. We're speaking from our own experience. We're speaking from our own perspective, and especially in the 21st century, in 1836, germ theory wasn't really a thing. So, there's all these elements that go into it, where, we have to understand that, it's a bit more complicated than just, face value in some ways.
I just wanted to ask, was someone else speaking? I just wanted to ask, because you didn't really talk about the designer. Do you know who drew this, and also what references he was looking at? Because as far as I know, but I mean, I don't know a lot, but as far as I know, that's not the traditional costume of a Sumatran who it's supposed to be. So I was just wondering what that kind of, because you told us about the first kind of draft of the seal. I'm just wondering from an art standpoint, how they came to this one.
Yeah, so George Peabody was one of the aldermen that was put on board he put himself in a way on board the task force. It was sort of a volunteer role of people who wanted to be a part of it. He himself was the son of a merchant that made a lot of wealth in the Sumatran trade in this case. And so himself would have had definitely himself had first-hand experience with the people over there and in that tip of Sumatra. And so there would have been a lot of I would imagine, careful consideration, but again, assuming from 21st century. But there was a lot of direct relationship and direct understanding. So it wasn't like they were being like, we just want this type of person, and I don't know, it might look like this type of thing. There was a lot of direct connection. And I should point out, a lot of the fashions of Asia would find their way back to Salem. If you went to, say, Hamilton Hall and you went to a ball, at the time, you would see a lot of people wearing, a lot of these Asian clothes, because that was the fashion that was sort of seen as like representing your true connection to that far off place, whether it was you purchased it yourself, from the land, or you had someone buy it for you in a way. So there is a lot of there is a lot of consideration given to why they look the way that they do, specific to their clothing. Now, this is where I really would want for Dr. Feener to give, when he gives his presentation on the Akanese people, to really sort of help us understand that, because I think that, especially that relationship between Salem and them, he'll certainly be able to speak a lot better to it than I can, which is really more from the perspective of the people here in Salem.
Okay, just one more comment.
Please.
There was a change to the seal you showed us, right? There was the black and white version, and then there was the color version. And the imagery did change slightly. I'm just curious, like, was that also because there was such a long discussion about as you were saying, they were debating well into the night. I'm wondering if that change, which again, from at least from an artistic perspective, changed quite a lot. Was there also a discussion around that?
No doubt there was, but no record, at least that I've been able to track down, has shown it.
Yeah, and there have been multiple versions of the seal. I'm hoping we can cover all of them at some point. Yeah, at least from my own standpoint, it's hard to find information from reliable sources on all of the versions of the seals. So I'm hoping we can get an expert in here to cover that specific point, because I know I've personally struggled finding concrete information on all the different versions. Okay.
Well, and to that point, Regina, I'm hoping that Eileen, as well as the keeper of
Oh,
the
yeah.
seal, might be able to, maybe she has access to physical that's what most of them are, physical documents at this point, that would provide more insight into that.
Good point. And I'll actually call it. Yeah, I'll email her about that specifically. Okay. Thank you so much, Vijay. That was very informative.
Very welcome. My
And
pleasure.
yeah, yeah, thank you. I just want to note that we are kind of behind, and it's 5:50. Are people okay powering through, or would we rather? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads. So
I think it's not as long as VJ's, and it's all pictures. I don't have anything to read. It's all
Great.
pictures, just that statement that you had me put on. So
yeah.
it'll be looking at children's book illustrations. And that's
Perfect. I just wanted to read the room a little bit, and if people are okay continuing on, then we will continue on. Okay. Excellent. So with that, we will pass it off to Suzanne. And Suzanne, I think I have
do you
the
want to
presentation.
show it, or I think I can share my screen. I've got it, the one you sent me.
Oh, I have it pulled up, so I'm ready to go. Let me
Oh,
just
all
share
right.
it.
Go.
Yeah. Slideshow from beginning. Perfect. All right, Suzanne, you have the floor.
All right. So you can that's very dramatic and lovely. All right. A visual exploration of early 20th century illustrations depicting Asian male figures with stereotypical features, drawing parallels to the imagery used in the Salem City Seal. So rather than going off on a lot of tangents with all of the imagery in children's book illustrations, I'm just centering in only on that male figure who has the parasol, the robe, the hat, the pigtail, and the Fu Manchu. So that's what we're going to look at today in a lot of different illustration venues, because illustration is my jam. So next slide. Regina wanted me to read this advisory, and I love it. And I wish it was the only words I had to say, because I think it says everything. But I'll read it nonetheless, and I do have some comments to make on the images as they go by. So there's an advisory on the content of the images I'm going to show you. The following presentation includes historical imagery that depicts Asian figures using harmful and stereotypical features, such as long mustaches, robes, conical hats, pigtails, and parasols. These depictions were once considered acceptable and even positive in mainstream media, but are now widely recognized as offensive caricatures that contributed to the marginalization of Asian communities. While none of the images are overtly violent or political in nature, they nonetheless reflect a legacy of racial stereotyping in children's books, advertisements, and popular illustration. The intent of this presentation is to highlight how these stereotypes have persisted, often unnoticed, through cultural symbols like our city seal. So please proceed with care. Viewer discretion is advised. Does anybody want to stop watching? Okay, then on to the next slide. So I picked these 3 slides to open my presentation because of the very direct the use of elements that are all the same with our seal. So the first one is a cover of a children's book I'll talk a little bit more about, called Little Black Sambo. The middle one is a postcard that I guess at one time you could purchase if you visited San Francisco and send back to your friends. And then the one on the right is an image I found because I was looking for an image of the figure in our city seal that had more detail, because that's always been kind of a frustrating aspect of being able to see into something that's supposedly so historic, but you can't see any detail. So I found this online, and I'm attributing that to Ty Hapworth, his Instagram. So next slide. Regina.
Yeah, it's I'm showing the next slide. Can
There
you
it
see
is.
it?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I want to say a little bit before I talk about these. Most of these images I'm going to show you were from beloved children's picture books that have been removed from publication after public protest from groups that were represented in the illustrations. And to note that illustration is a commercial art, so it's sending messages to the mass population, the general population. Children's books, advertisements, magazine art, and spot illustrations, which is what our city seal is a spot illustration. Illustrators are creating images meant to communicate with a public audience, typically positive messages that reflect the current cultural perspective of the time. So as history changes, perspectives also change. Illustrations of cigarette-smoking doctors and cowboys were prevalent during the golden age of advertising, yet they're now illegal to show that. Worth mentioning is the illustration also includes political cartoons and propaganda, which tend to create very negative messages, and I didn't include any imagery from those categories, even though they're considered illustration. They're too easily viewed, too, I think, as disturbing racial stereotypes today. So we're going to look at Asian males with the robe, the hat, the mustache, the pigtail, and the parasol. So second slide, or the slide, oh, no, sorry, we're here. My eyes are bad, so I have to take my glasses. No, go back to the Little Black Sambo. I have a lot to say. So today, the character of Little Black Sambo, which is a book written in 1899 by Helen Bannerman, is viewed by almost everybody as racially offensive. And I'm starting with Little Black Sambo because he shares these elements with the city seal figure in almost every illustration on the cover of the book. A robe, a parasol, palm trees, and central composition surrounded by lovely typography. Little Black Sambo is very bright and very resourceful in the narrative. And Bannerman did not intentionally write a book to offend people, but as an exotic tale to entertain a white audience. It's worth mentioning here, because it might surprise you, that Little Black Sambo is a resident of South India, and his parents are named Black Mumbo and Black Jumbo. So it's Little Black Sambo and his mother and father, Black Mumbo and Black Jumbo. So in 1932, Langston Hughes said that Little Black Sambo exemplified the pickaninny variety of storybook, and amusing undoubtedly to the white child, but like an unkind word to one who has known too many hurts to enjoy the additional pain of being laughed at. And I want to read that again because that quote for me is really important. It's a storybook that's amusing, undoubtedly, to the white child, but like an unkind word to one who has known too many hurts to enjoy the additional pain of being laughed at. So Black educators, civil rights leaders, the NAACP organized numerous campaigns to get the book banned from public libraries, especially elementary schools. And by the 1950s, the book was dropped from many lists of recommended books. And by the 1960s, the book was generally viewed as a remnant of a racist past. Okay, so moving on. So this is a book that my mother actually read to me when I was a little kid. It's called Five Chinese Brothers, and it was written by Claire Houchet Bishop and Kurt Wiese in 1938. And in this case, it's a three-color. They didn't have the technology to print full-color book illustrations. The budget would be too steep. So this is a three-color job. It's black, blue, and yellow is the third color. Each brother has a superpower and like the ability to swallow the sea. So the narrative revolves around the brothers and their superpower. All the brothers look exactly alike. They have the stereotypical features of slanty eyes, pigtail, little hat, and this bright yellow skin. And the brothers are drawn as identical, but everybody else in the book also looks just like them. So they're every depicted character that you see in the book, and you could go to the next one. I think I have one more slide there. Is rendered in the same way. So that's one of the brothers and a town council, a guy, I guess, yelling at him. So we could go to the next one. So Dr. Seuss has had a number of books with racist imagery and ethnic and race differences, Black, Asian, Middle Easterners depicted as exotic and funny characters. And here's his version of the hat and the pigtail in the robe. And he is quite beloved. We could go to the next slide. There's more. On the left is one with an example of the Black figures holding up a sort of fantasy bird on a stick and carrying it along. And then it's hard to see in this slide, we have a lot happening, but the three Asian figures they're balancing on their heads a big cage with another one of his fantasy characters in it. And Dr. Seuss Enterprises, which is founded by Dr. Seuss's family, ceased publication of these books. You can't get them today due to the imagery, calling them hurtful and wrong. And that's his own heirs saying that. I think it's worth noting, and I guess Rachel did too, because she wrote that out there, because in 2017, a school librarian in Cambridge criticized a gift of 10 Dr. Seuss books from First Lady Melania Trump, saying many of the works were steeped in racist propaganda, caricatures, and harmful stereotypes. Okay, next slide. So Walt Disney Studios, because this was Walt Disney Studios made animations, they often had racial features and voices projected onto animated animal characters. So we don't have the hat and the mustache and the pigtail, but these cats from two separate animated feature films are clearly Asian. A warning message now appears if you go to Disney Plus to stream these movies. Multiple vintage Disney studio films, including Dumbo, The Jungle Book, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Aladdin, and the Aristocats. So one of these is from Lady and the Tramp and the other is from the Aristocats, but all those movies have examples of similar treatments. Okay, next one, the Dennis Lowe. So Dennis Lowe is maybe one of the most beloved children's book illustrators of the time. He did the classic Mother Goose, which just extraordinarily talented illustrator, which is why some of this is heartbreaking. He illustrated all the series. A lot of people don't know that the Wizard of Oz books were a series. There were 11 books in it, and he illustrated all of them. And so that's a cover of the Wizard of Oz. Next slide. This is from a book called Around the World in a Berry Wagon. And it's, I can't even read that, but basically it's about going around the world and stopping in each country and visiting the children of that country. So in this one, they're in Japan. The next one, I have two of his in there. So we also did advertising illustration. And this is an advertisement for, I have looked at this and I can't figure out what the product does. I think it's some kind of paint, but it says the Chi Enamel Chinks will convert old carpeted floors into beautiful hardwood effects. They will renew and beautify every piece of furniture, bric-a-brac, etc. Little expense, little trouble. And you'll see a woman, an American housewife, surrounded by 7 figures with hats, robes, pigtails, and they're painting all her things for her with this product. Okay. So there was a lot in advertising because advertisers like to get people associating their product with positive feelings. And so these advertisements were created to sell services and merchandise using Asian figures to associate with exotic people, faraway lands, fantasy experiences. So if you drank this tea, you were off you'd go. So the two on the left are tea ads using the our figure with the parasol and the robe and the mustache and the hat. Then we see them again in the Schweppes ad. So if you can't get Schweppes, you drink Tara Sun. I don't know what any of these mean because these are from before my time. But again, the robes there are very beautifully illustrated. And one of the things that when illustrators are commissioned, it's often to associate beauty and the beauty of art with a product that people buy. So a lot of these, and I would include the seal in this description, are very beautiful little paintings. That's an exquisite little painting, but there again, we have our male figures with their pigtails, mustaches, robes, hats, etc. And then on the far right, we get to switch the little hat to a crown, and he's selling us a tasty Chungking Cantonese style dinner there. Okay, let's go to the magazine covers. Oh no, so we still had these. I put these in because these were advertisements around the time period that we're talking about. So one is for rat poison, and there's our figure with his hat and his pigtail and his robe about to eat a rat. Clears out rats, mice, bed bugs, flies, and roaches. And then the one on the right is for the Empire Ringer Company in Auburn, New York. And it's, I guess, a Chinese laundry. And the figure has his cue, his pigtail is caught in the washing machine rollers. And I guess this is supposed to be funny. All right, that's it for the ads. So book and magazine covers, it was the same thing again, exotic world, exotic people. I'm not sure if this is opium, the person on the left is smoking, but they've got the look. And then that is the cover of the October Scribners, which is a publisher, and it's showing very much similar iconography to our seal. The figure has its parasol and his robe and his cue, and he's on the beach, and there's plants, and there's a ship in the background, and a dragon. So one last slide. I think we're almost done. Oh no, one more. So those are two more magazines. Harper's Weekly, which is still a magazine today. And it's really hard to see that. That image is not in very good focus, but that's a good segue into the last slide. So there's, again, our Asian figure having a conversation with a Native American figure together, the two of them on the cover. And then the British Columbia magazine was a travel magazine, I think. So this is my last slide, and I want to make the point because I think a lot of people don't realize this when they're looking at our seal, is when things are reproduced at a really small scale, historical detail, specific region, and content is largely lost. And what happens is that our seal figure appears just the same as the images of the other Asian characters that I just showed you. He's identifiable only by his hat, basically his silhouette. The image that you can see the detail in on the right is from the 1928 Vermont sesquicentennial 2-cent stamp, and it's commemorating their Green Mountain Boys who fought, they were a militia that fought in the American Revolution, or no, yeah, it was the American Revolution. But their outfits were very specific. They wore buckskin, and you can see all the details in his buckskin outfit. He has a scarf and a hat and the fringe and the boots and the crossbody bags and a long rifle. And that's historically accurate. That's what they wore. And you can even see he's standing in his Green Mountain, the pine trees next to him. At the small scale on the left, though, the historically accurate buckskin costume and rifle plug up, and the figure could be a trapper or a frontiersman or just a guy from Vermont. So it's very hard to gather any kind of specificity or detail from that. He's a little shape. One last wrap-up comment that I want to make, and then I'm done. And this is worth noting with regard to the seal image. I think the beauty of a well-painted image can be a distraction. Our seal's beautiful, and I don't think anybody can deny that. And I think it also might be operating on for some people on that level of beauty, of pure beauty. It's got an analogous color palette. The typography is really well designed. There's ribbons, there's doves. Who doesn't love beautiful plants? The figures, the representation of the figure can escape focus and all that. And then my last point was that when compared with overtly negative images, for example, political cartooning and propaganda, the seal figure might feel very positive by contrast. But stereotyping does not equal positive representation. So that would be it.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can I ask a question? Is that all right? Rahina? Yeah. So is there, this is again, speaking in drafts, right? Because I'm just absorbing all this of what you just showed. Is there something to be said for the intention of the creation? So we saw a lot of ephemera, right? Advertising, books, things that were, I suppose, never really meant to last, versus when, the application of the seal, where it's, as it was quoted in the city council, probably to be used as long as it shall continue to exist. Is there something to be said for the application? And of course, we're never going to understand the intent, but if the application in and of itself is supposed to be quick and entertaining, or for salability, or for humor, albeit in very bad taste in all of that, is there something to be said for that? Is trying to understand,
Vijay,
especially the
those
root of
things
our
weren't
issue?
considered in bad taste at the time. That's my point. They were very popular and they've all been removed from publication. Everything I showed. The only place you
Right.
can get a book of a little Black Sambo copy is on in eBay, and they're going sadly for hundreds of dollars. But times change. And so what was entertaining and popular then, and keep in mind, it wasn't popular with all Americans. Remember Langston Hughes's quote about the little child?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
At
100%
the
agree.
time of publication, that book was not something that Black parents would choose to read. And I think the other thing I would point out to you, because that kind of stunned me, is that little Black Sambo isn't African American, he's Indian. But
Right.
yet he's presented with the stereotypical features of an
Right.
African American person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm not trying to defend it by any means. This is something where, when I say in bad taste, I'm speaking from our perspective today, knowing now what we know. But I'm also trying to get an understanding of, when you're making something of the time, it's, especially for the examples we've seen, they're ephemeral. You're
They
selling
weren't
a book,
though.
you're
They had
selling a
to, that book
product.
was in
Well,
publication
Suzanne,
for a long
can
time. And they had to fight hard, all those groups, to get it removed from publication.
absolutely, completely understand. I think of, when, as an author writing a book or creating a children's novel, whatever it might be, or especially for advertising, where it's there to capture your attention. So you're really sort of, speaking to the moment. Not that it's right by any means, especially by the 21st century standards, but understanding the what it was made for and how long it was supposed to represent something. I think of the examples you showed were of their time. Again, not okay, but it's of their time, in a manner of saying that, we're selling a book, we're selling a product, we're trying to grab your attention, and to do so would be such a way that it's, well, caricaturish in that sense. And again, we can never know the intent of someone when they, create something. But understanding that if you're creating something for advertising versus creating something for the representation of a city for time immemorial, one is very just to sell a product in the moment to grab your attention, and the other is a representation of a self and a community.
I don't agree with that. People are still reading Wizard of Oz today, and they're producing it on Broadway, and it's one of the most popular narratives that there is. It's just that the representations that were created by that illustrator have changed, but I think it's because times change. I don't think you can guarantee something will last in perpetuity with
Mm-hmm.
that same perspective, because people aren't the same now as they were then.
I agree. I also wonder too, you know, when Frank L. Baum wrote Wizard of Oz, was he saying this is going to last in the way that it did? Would he know that? Was he intending that what we now, you know, consider the Wizard of Oz and the canon of popular culture, did he know that was going to have that impact?
We
Just
don't, we just live and breathe in the time that we're born to live and breathe in.
right. Well, and that's it. And so, you know, trying to understand the longevity, the intention of the longevity of the product, I guess, is sort
But
of,
we can intend all we want for perpetuity, and life will just laugh at us.
I mean, yeah, we
That's
are
not
of
a
time.
possibility. That's not a realistic possibility in my mind to plan for. I mean, even I don't think that's a realistic uh, goal that you can have for a work of art.
Mhm. Okay, I think speaking in drafts, I'm just, it
Well,
struck
and
me
that's
and
my
wanted
answer to your draft, and it's a draft as well.
to appreciate that.
I mean, yeah, and I think, you know, um, I think Suzanne at one point said, like, especially in the advertising section, like some of these images are beautiful images, right? Like, and they're certainly not meant to be offensive, or, you know, we can't speak to their intent, but I can't imagine that they, like the artists that made those advertisements, ever intended that. Um, but you know, things I think change and are interpreted, like even just the conversation of the state seal, right? Like, and how we are now looking at that through a different lens, right? Um, yeah, I think that's just what I would add to this conversation. Like, I think just for me and through my own lived experience, I'm Mexican, right? And I think like often Mexicans are depicted with sombreros and like very stereotypical images that you know, oftentimes, you know, even to this day, people don't think much about it and they're like, oh, it's not offensive, or it's not this or that. But it is, right? And like even just Cinco de Mayo just passed, and it's like, you know, I always kind of brace myself because it's like always, you know, little chihuahuas with sombreros and like maracas, and people think it's funny, or like, oh, look how cute this image is, and like the intent is never to offend, but of course it's like really offensive to me and my culture. Yeah, so like even when I started my role with the city, I immediately saw the city seal, and I was like, "Ooh, like this doesn't feel okay." Right? And I did have a few internal conversations about it, and the sentiment was like, "Oh, well, it's a spice trader." Right? You know, like kind of like it's our history, and or not even it's our history. It was just more like, you know, and so I just kind of felt, you know, I'll let this kind of play itself out, and sure enough, it became it you know, it was brought to our attention by community members, right? So, anyways, just kind of sharing some thoughts as they're coming up.
I'm also going to speak in drafts, and I want to say that, like, the imagery, again, you know, like, this whole idea that we want symbols to last forever. Whose symbols do we want? Like, you know, it I feel like where we are as society, at least I would like to believe that where we are at society, we make decisions in a more democratic and inclusive way in deciding the symbols that exist in our communities. And so even, you know, intent or no intent, I also wonder, like, there's a certain group of people who decided that this was going to be a symbol of what they want, or they recommend to be something that lasts in perpetuity. And I don't, and also like that's not untrue, because so many other states, so like Natick has changed their seal, that very thing that everybody was saying, oh, it should last forever and in perpetuity. And then there is a town that changed it not so long ago. So, um, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I wonder too, I kind of wonder as well, there's an opportunity to depict, especially now in the 21st century, to improve upon perhaps the intent. And, we have the ability to speak to the Yakanese. We have the ability to consult with them. If Natick, if they brought in a native person to correct that imagery to make it more accurate, is that better, or does that just, unless people know that history, is that still offensive? So I'm sort of curious.
I would say that having a figure on the seal in the first place is unnecessary if we want to talk about the spice trade. We could have a beautiful botanical illustration in that center circle, keep all the stuff, everything that's there, in a beautiful botanical illustration of a nice black pepper plant. I think that when people of one ethnicity try to represent figures of another ethnicity, it's never a great idea. And so just the whole focus on this comes down to that figure. That's why my presentation only talked about the figure and not the dove and the other things, because it's the figure that is at issue.
Vijay, did you finish your thought? Yeah, and let's just be mindful. Let's let people finish their thoughts. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I forgot what the rest of it was. I apologize. But Suzanne, I agree with you 100% about having a group of people depicting another group. I agree with you absolutely in that case. But also, if we're thinking about improving it, what might be the steps that could be done to make it inclusive to those people that feel, that they weren't included, and they were not included directly in the talks of creating that imagery. So, we live in the 21st century with germ theory and electricity and running water, and they didn't when the seal was made. So, this is where, I'm just trying to think about the different perspectives there.
Yeah, and I just want to throw something out there that like we have a long journey to go, but I think one question that's been on kind of on the docket for many seal changes and flag changes is like, should we have a person, Is it ethical to have a figure? Like, for example, I lived in Switzerland for a while and they have Helvetia, or like they have a goddess that's not a real person. It's not like, it's just like a modeled maybe after a Greek god. I feel like that's less problematic. We also saw some seals that you shared, Vijay, that were like, I don't know, like they're not real people, but when we try to like put someone and be like, that's this type of person, I think that's when it gets sticky. And I think that's a question I'd like us all to kind of just sit with and be like, what could make sense? What would feel appropriate? And yeah, like, and what is it in this day and age? So again, I don't want to like offer any conclusive like yes, no. It's just like, let's think about that.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
I completely agree with that as well, because I think that's one distinction that is incredibly important, is that if if Salem was predominantly an Asian community, which it's not, right? But like in that predominantly Asian community said, we like this representation, that would be different, right? Because I feel like, even just going back to my own example of like Mexican imagery that I've come across in my lifetime, like, a lot of times that is done by communities who are not Mexican, right? And yeah, like I think there's a lot of imagery that was approved by predominantly Mexican community, and it just looks different. It feels different when you include the people who it represents, right? Which of course I think we know did not happen because of the historical context in the situation.
I think it also gets dicey though, because it is the Asian American diaspora is such a vast community with our, like I think that when we look at it from like a very dominant culture gaze, we are looking at one representation from one community, and we are quick to be like, oh, let's just talk to that community, and if they think it's okay, then it's okay. Um, and I'm worried about that because uh because the Asian community is not one group, and the folks who live here is not one group either. And those who make it to America, if you really want to get into immigration history and the privileges of people who can make it to North America and live here, and our experiences, and like the stereotyping that goes into it. Like, I like, for example, I'm Indian. I did not know until today that little black Sambo was actually a South Indian man. Like, look at my own like, like our awareness and our understanding of our own identity is so deep and vast to just say that I'm just going to bring on a representative of, like, I mean, heck, on a given day, I don't agree with my own dad on certain things, right? Like, to think that my dad, who's also an Indian man, somehow will represent me and say everything there is to about Indian culture is also not a very this one just doesn't feel the ethical or the right thing to do. So I just want to also say that out loud. Like, I don't want one person or one individual be like, oh, I spoke to a bunch of people from this group and they think it's okay, so therefore it's okay. How does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
we can all be from the same group and still have. So I think we go back to, like, do we, like, the question that Rachel was asking is like, should a person be any person depiction? Outside of like Hercules or some mythical, super god or goddess, should there be an individual of a certain culture group on any, and that includes like white caricatures or any community person should be on a seal. Like, that's a good ethical question. I wish we could deliberate on that together.
Hmm. And yeah, the Dita, I agree there. Absolutely. I do think in the case of the seal, they were trying to depict a certain specific person, if not person type of, people from a region. So I think within that case, it's sort of, they were trying for something. And this is where I'd like to get Dr. Michael Feener in to speak to that point, because he would definitely know more than I in this case. But getting that perspective of the fact that it was intended to be a specific group of people in a specific area, understanding that that was, as the whole point was that was the source of Salem's wealth, really, in a way. But then also I want him to speak to the relationship that we had with them, because that's going to play a huge role as well into helping understand the intent of creating this one depiction. So there's a lot of questions that this brings up, certainly.
Yeah, and I also just want to throw in, like, so when you had your presentation, Vijay, I was like immediately struck by Groton, which was like the Bible. It said like Holy Bible, and it was like the plow. And I was just quickly Googling it, and apparently some people were talking about recently about changing the seal, because they were like, this doesn't represent us, and we also don't want to have this like religious affiliation. Um, Another point I want to bring up is, you know, if we are going to look at the seal, if we are going to talk about, people being on it or not being on it, I think another question that we should introduce into like our kind of regular reflection is like, does this still represent Salem? I mean, so they had a very strong like capitalist relationship with Asia. They were in some cases it was like mutually beneficial, but as you know, a lot of it was like they're like, we need to extract wealth, we need to make money um with these people, from these people. um And so I really look forward to Michael telling us about that historical relationship and also, you know, presenting a few perspectives from Indonesian people today. But is that relevant now? You know, as Salem has grown, is that something we want to keep? Is it just another question I want to throw out there with having not made any judgments, but just like the Holy Bible, is this is this what we want? You know, Sumatra, is that also? And again, that motto, I don't love it, right? To the farthest point, to the rich shores of the rich east. It's very extractivist. It
Yes.
feels a little bit colonial. It's like that's also not what we're trying to do. I think all of our, you know, we have our sister city, right, in Japan. We have the Peabody Essex Museum working with Chinese artists, like contemporary Chinese artists. We are really trying to have collaborations here. We're not trying to just like be like, let's get that rich East, you know, let's get all that money. Um, those are other thoughts I just want to throw out there and again talk about over like a year and more.
And if just to continue that, just like, putting it out there to think about, I'm thinking about the seal as a representation of the city in the context of the other representations of the city that's out there. So we had the conversation about the logo of the witch that's all over the cop cars and the police station or the fire department, all this kind of stuff. And, I feel like this is kind of tied into that. If we're having the conversation of sensitivity over an imagery of a figure, well, if that's gonna stand, this is in a way the two seals today, whether one's the logo and one's the seal, they're representing the two faces of what Salem represents. And to change one with putting maybe not a blind eye, because we haven't even talked about that yet, but I know that's not really necessarily the question that was brought up in this conversation, but it is the more prominent imagery of the representation of the city that's out there. So I just want to have that in concert with this conversation because of the fact that major representation of the city is going to be potentially forever changed by us. And are we going to leave one and, change the other? I just want to, that's a much bigger conversation, but I also want to have that sort of not 10,000 foot view, but maybe 1,000 foot view type of thing around it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's oh, you go.
oh, sorry. I always kind of wait a second and then jump in and yeah, we all end up speaking over each other anyways. So I think that is beyond our scope. We can certainly add that in the recommendations, whatever those are. I just think, yes, like I think yeah, changing those logos is going to be an entire process on its own. And I don't know how deeply we can get into that. Um, but I think we can, yeah, I think we can definitely explore some suggestions, right? And like we can explore some thinking as to like why we think like a more cohesive approach to a seal might make sense.
Yeah. Keeping it all in context, I think is just something that would be, important for us to consider.
Yeah, and I just want to I just want to clarify that I'm not against referring to Salem's maritime history or the trade with China. It's more like how are we framing it, you know? And I think that the imagery and the yeah, the motto all kind of tied together. So just thinking about like other ways that we could still celebrate the history. I think you're absolutely right. I definitely don't want a witch hat or anything to do with witches on there. And we kind of do have these, like you said, the two faces of Salem. We only have like these things that we're known for, so we can't lose the maritime history, I guess. Like otherwise we have kind of nothing else, just witches. But yeah, more research, more thought.
I really like Suzanne's point earlier. I really think that leaning into like nature symbolism is a good option for so many reasons, right? Like we can represent the trade and that history using different imagery than like depicting a person, right? I do feel like that, like if you take all the elements of the city seal, I think like that is what makes it problematic. And like I think Suzanne's presentation zeroed in on why that is. So if we were to take what we do like about the seal and its history, and we can find other ways to represent that, I think that that could be a potential good option. And I'm also just a fan of nature imagery in general. Like I think it can be very beautiful and it can be deeply symbolic. Um, and I'm sure there's so many artists who would do an incredible job at um at doing that.
Well, and I think it's worth saying that it might make some of the more skittery Salem residents happy to have even all of those seal elements intact with just something else in that center sweet spot of the circle. And um, I can get some examples of botanical illustration from that time even. There was no camera, so everything in terms of botany was recorded through artists who were highly skilled, and there's beautiful, beautiful illustrations of spice plants or that. Oh, I have one of the pepper plant that could be, placed front and center there because it seems to me that's what it's about. The seal is about the spice trade and not a guy standing there in a robe with a pigtail and a hat.
I'm saying this jokingly for anyone looking into the future, but like pumpkin spice on our seal, right? Nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, all those were brought in through Salem for the first time. That made our wealth. So hey.
Does that come from Asia?
Yes, it does. Well, pumpkin spice, well, no, right. But the combination of those spices, yes.
A pumpkin spice latte seal.
If we did that, that would not be wrong, I don't think.
Please stop. No.
Yeah.
I would be the first one to object to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, nobody wants to focus on on Salem's witch history for the seal for so many reasons, right? And not to mention that that opens its own can of worms because there's so many problematic depictions of the witch trials, right? So I do think like it's worth acknowledging that, what Rachel mentioned, that we do want to celebrate the maritime history, the spice trade, the trade with Asia. Yeah, even just the fact that we had, um, yeah, like all of these incredible navigators that were able to survive such long voyages. Like I think that's that's worth finding a way to symbolize in a seal. And I think there's ways to do it that are better and um yeah, and like just to have a more appropriate um yeah, have one more appropriate imagery in the present day.
I do want to put out there for anyone, I'm thinking about how this recording listened to in the future, right? So understanding that for anyone listening, these are ideas. They're not foregone conclusions. This is just us discussing based upon we're speaking in drafts here. So it's sort of like these are ideas we're throwing out. These are not foregone conclusions, but just having people understand that I think is going to be important.
I just missed everything that you said because my volume went to 0, so I hope that you didn't say anything to me directly.
No, all good.
Okay.
No, it was just in general for posterity in the future, if you will.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So are we concluding this discussion? Okay.
Thank you, Suzanne, and yeah, that was great. This conversation was fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you both of you for your time.
Yeah, thank you both for your presentations. Very informative. All right, so moving on. So just new business. For the June meeting, I guess we will have another meeting between now and then. So I'll get the information out for that. But in June, we'll have a presentation by the other historian on the task force, Dr. Michael Feener. We will also, I think I did add you, Rachel. So you're on for next meeting, and I know there was some confusion around like whether, or not confusion, but like some yeah, you were undecided whether you were gonna present or not, but I do have you on June.
I think I would like to present. There's actually like I mean, I love what Suzanne shared, but I'm like, there's even more examples and history that I want to share from that kind of like art perspective. And also talking a lot about monuments, which I was like actually writing about for an article. So I think it would be nice to share with you guys.
Great. Well, you're on the June agenda for a presentation. And then after that, in July, we will have Eileen present on yeah, basically her role as keeper of the seal. Does anybody else want to present in July? Okay, Aditi, I will add you.
Thank you. Is it possible, so when I do a presentation, can I have a co-presenter who's not on the task force, or would that be like who might
Yeah,
have like a historical expertise or something?
yes, that's okay. You just have
Okay.
to be very specific about why you're inviting that person and like what their area of expertise is.
Okay, gotcha.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else we would like to consider for the June meeting? Okay,
No. So we're
excellent.
meeting in 2 weeks, right?
We
Now?
are meeting in 2 weeks to talk about
Sounds good.
the drive and the public outreach and the press release. Okay. All right. So with that, I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can I get a
Yep.
second?
Second.
All those in favor, raise hand. Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Bye
Good meeting.
all.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Great
Bye,
meeting.
guys.